Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Snow drifted lazily past the floor-to-ceiling windows of Blake Porter's home office, creating a peaceful backdrop as he studied the blueprints spread across his mahogany desk. His latest project, a modern community center meant to breathe new life into downtown, represented everything he'd built his career on: innovation, sustainability, and community impact. At 45, Blake had earned his reputation as one of the city's most respected architects, and Porter Gregg Architects stood as a testament to his vision. The faint sounds of Christmas music and teenage chatter filtered up from the living room below. Blake allowed himself a small smile as he made final notes on the blueprints. The annual Porter Christmas party was just hours away, and the house was already coming alive with preparation. "Dad," Marcus's voice carried up the stairs. "Mason's hogging all the good ornaments again." "I am not," came the predictable response. "You're just mad because you can't reach the top of the tree." Blake rolled up the blueprints with practiced precision. "I'll be right down," he called out, his deep voice carrying an authority that immediately quieted the squabble. At 15, the twins were good kids, excellent students, actively involved in school activities, and generally well-behaved. If they looked nothing like him, well, he'd long ago attributed that to Sabrina's dominant genes. Descending the stairs, Blake paused to observe the scene before him. The 12-foot Christmas tree dominated their colonial home's spacious living room, already half-decorated with an eclectic mix of expensive glass ornaments and cherished homemade decorations from the twins' elementary school days. Mason stood precariously on a stepladder, while Marcus sorted through boxes of ornaments below. "Having trouble reaching the top?" Blake asked, approaching the tree. Without waiting for an answer, he picked up a delicate crystal star. "Here, let me help." Mason scrambled down from the ladder, oddly quick to yield his position. "Thanks, Dad," he said, the slight pause before the words so brief Blake might have imagined it. The front door opened, letting in a blast of cold air along with Sabrina Porter. At 43, she remained as striking as the day Blake had met her in college, tall, elegant, with the same honey-blonde hair the twins had inherited. She carried several shopping bags, presumably last-minute party supplies. "Blake," she acknowledged him with a nod that felt more businesslike than intimate. "The caterers will be here in an hour. Could you make sure your office is locked? We don't want any guests wandering up there." "Already done," Blake replied, noting how she'd already turned away before he finished speaking. After 18 years of marriage, he'd grown used to Sabrina's efficient, sometimes distant manner. She managed their family's real estate investments with the same precision she applied to everything else in their lives. The doorbell rang, and Marcus rushed to answer it. Uncle James, Blake's younger brother, swept in, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and winter air. James Porter had always been the more flamboyant of the two brothers, choosing the art world over their father's wishes for both sons to become architects. His gallery, Porter Contemporary, had become one of the city's premier art spaces. "There are my favorite nephews," James exclaimed, pulling both boys into a hug that seemed to last a beat too long. "I brought my new camera, thought we might do an impromptu photo session before the party." Blake noticed how the twins' faces lit up at the suggestion. "They need to finish decorating first," he said firmly. "The party starts in 3 hours. James waved a dismissive hand. "Come on, big brother. All work and no play. The tree looks fine as it is." He turned to Sabrina, who had reappeared from the kitchen. "Don't you think so, Sabrina?" Something passed between them, a look so quick Blake almost missed it. Sabrina's smile seemed to warm several degrees. "The boys have been working hard all morning. Let them have some fun with their uncle." Before Blake could object, James had herded the twins toward his personal studio space, a room Sabrina had insisted he needed when they'd renovated the house 5 years ago. The door closed behind them with a definitive click. The following morning at Porter Gregg Architects, Blake noticed something off about his business partner's behavior. Owen Gregg, usually direct to the point of bluntness, seemed unable to meet his eyes during their morning meeting. About the community center project, Owen began, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "I think we should consider." He trailed off, glancing at the office manager's desk visible through the glass wall. Alice Malone, their office manager and Sabrina's friend since college, quickly looked away, but not before Blake caught the worry in her expression. "Consider what?" Blake prompted, his tone level but commanding. "Nothing," Owen said quickly. "Just some minor design adjustments. We can discuss it later." Blake leaned back in his chair, studying his friend and business partner of 20 years. Owen had been best man at his wedding, had helped him build this firm from nothing. They didn't do later, not about work, not about anything. "Owen," Blake said quietly, "is there something I should know?" Owen's face reddened slightly. "No, of course not. I'm just stressed about the holiday deadlines." He stood abruptly. "I should check on the Henderson project." As Owen practically fled the office, Blake noticed Alice quickly picking up her phone. Her voice carried faintly through the glass. "He's starting to notice." I know. Just be careful." That evening, Blake arrived home to find James's car in the driveway again. Inside, he found the twins and his brother huddled over photography equipment in the living room, all three looking up guiltily when he entered. "Another photography lesson?" Blake asked, keeping his tone light despite the growing unease in his stomach. "Uncle James is teaching us about portrait lighting," Marcus explained, his enthusiasm obvious. "He says we have natural talent." "Well, they come by it honestly," James said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Some things just run in the family, right, boys?" Mason laughed, a sound that seemed somehow private, shared between them. When Blake tried to join the conversation, asking about their technique, the twins' responses were polite but dismissive. They turned back to James, hanging on his every word about aperture settings and composition. Blake retreated to his office, the blueprint for the community center still spread across his desk. He'd built his career on seeing patterns, on understanding how different elements came together to create a whole. Lately, the patterns in his own home felt increasingly wrong, like a building with hidden structural flaws. The night of the Christmas party arrived, bringing with it a house full of guests and the pleasant chaos of holiday celebration. Blake moved through the crowds, accepting compliments on the firm's latest projects, discussing the downtown revitalization plans with city council members who'd been invited. Every time he turned toward the garage where he kept his prized collection of architectural models, someone intercepted him. First Marcus, clutching a college application essay that apparently couldn't wait until tomorrow to discuss. Then Mason, full of detailed questions about the car Blake had promised for their upcoming 16th birthday. It was nearing midnight when Blake finally broke free from a conversation with a potential client. The garage door was slightly ajar, spilling a thin line of light onto the snow. Through the window, he saw them, Sabrina and James, locked in an embrace that left no room for innocent interpretation. James's hand tangled in Sabrina's hair as they kissed, their profiles clear in the harsh fluorescent light. Blake's hand was steady as he pushed open the door. The sound made them turn, but neither jumped apart guiltily. Instead, Sabrina's lips curved into a cold smile. 18 years, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. 18 years of shared holidays, shared meals, shared lies. And you never once questioned why the boys look exactly like him. She gestured to James, who kept one arm possessively around her waist. "They've been calling him Dad since they could talk when you weren't around to hear, of course." Behind Blake, a floorboard creaked. He turned to find the twins standing there, their faces showing not shame but something closer to triumph. "You're just a provider," Marcus said, his voice hard. "A walking checkbook." Mason nodded, moving to stand beside James. "Uncle James is our real dad. He always has been." Blake looked at his brother, at the man who had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. James met his gaze without flinching, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "What can I say, big brother?" James's voice was smooth as expensive whiskey. "You were always so focused on your precious buildings. Someone had to take care of your wife's other needs. And the twins?" Blake's voice remained perfectly controlled, even as his mind cataloged every detail of the scene before him. "How long have you been poisoning them against me?" Sabrina laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Poisoning? Please. They figured out the truth on their own. Smart boys, they get that from their father." She patted James's chest possessively. "We've been planning this for months," Marcus added, clearly enjoying the moment. "Waiting for the perfect time to tell you. The Christmas party was Mom's idea," Mason chimed in. "She thought it would be festive." Blake absorbed every word, every gesture, every smug expression. His face remained impassive, even as he mapped out the destruction of their carefully constructed world in his mind. They expected him to explode, to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Instead, he turned and walked away, his footsteps measured and calm. Behind him, he heard James call out mockingly, "Merry Christmas, brother." The party continued around him, a surreal backdrop to the revelation that had just shattered 18 years of his life. Blake moved through the crowds with perfect composure, shaking hands, making small talk. No one would guess that mere minutes ago, his entire world had shifted on its axis. Owen approached him near the punch bowl, guilt written clearly across his features. "Blake, Save it." Blake cut him off quietly. "We'll discuss your role in this another time." He watched Alice Malone whispering urgently to Sabrina's brother Tom in the corner, both of them shooting furtive glances his way. The network of lies suddenly became clear. How many of their friends had known? How many had watched him play the fool year after year? As the last guests departed, Blake stood in his office, looking out over the snow-covered garden. He could hear them below: Sabrina, James, and the twins laughing together like the family they'd apparently always been. Their voices carried clearly in the quiet house. "Did you see his face?" That was Marcus, sounding younger than his 15 years in his glee. "I thought he'd at least yell or something," Mason added, disappointed. "Instead, he just walked away." "That's your father for you," James said, his voice warm with false concern. "Always avoiding confrontation. Don't worry, boys. He'll probably throw himself into work and pretend none of this ever happened. As long as the checks keep coming," Sabrina added, followed by more laughter. Blake's reflection in the window remained perfectly composed. Let them think him weak. Let them believe their little drama had gone exactly as planned. They had no idea what was coming. Inside his mind, blueprints of a different sort were already taking shape, not for buildings, but for the systematic dismantling of everything James and Sabrina held dear. They thought they'd stolen his family? He would take their entire world. The snow continued to fall outside, covering everything in pristine white. By spring, Blake thought, the thaw would reveal a very different landscape. But for now, he let them celebrate their imagined victory. After all, the best revenge required patience, precision, and above all, perfect timing. He picked up his phone and began to make calls. The first one went to his lawyer, not the family attorney Sabrina knew about, but the shark he kept on retainer for his more challenging business deals. The second call was to a private investigator recommended by a client who'd once mentioned dealing with corporate espionage. "I need everything," Blake said quietly into the phone. "Every detail, every secret, every weakness. Price is no object." As he hung up, he heard the front door open and close, James finally leaving for the night. The sounds of Sabrina directing the twins to help clean up drifted up the stairs, all of them still riding the high of their grand revelation. Blake allowed himself a small smile as he shut down his computer. They thought the game was over. They didn't realize it was just beginning. Outside his office, he paused at the top of the stairs, listening to his soon-to-be ex-family's continued celebration. Sabrina's voice carried clearly, "Finally, we can stop pretending. Do you know how exhausting it's been, playing the perfect wife all these years?" "You did it beautifully, darling," James replied. "And now we can start our real life together." Blake descended the stairs, his footsteps deliberately heavy enough to announce his presence. The conversation cut off abruptly. He headed for the front door, pausing only to collect his coat. "Where are you going?" Sabrina demanded, already shifting into the role of wounded party. "We need to talk about this." "No," Blake said simply, his voice carrying the same authority that had built one of the city's most successful architectural firms. "We don't." He closed the door behind him with quiet finality, leaving them to their hollow victory. In the garage, he passed the spot where he'd discovered them, noting with cold amusement that they'd knocked over one of his architectural models in their passion. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. They tried to destroy something he'd built. Now he would show them exactly what destruction really looked like. As he drove through the snowy streets, Blake's mind was already several moves ahead. They thought they knew him, the predictable architect, the distant father, the cuckolded husband. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first snowflakes of a new storm began to fall as Blake pulled into the parking garage of the city's most exclusive hotel. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, he would sleep soundly, secure in the knowledge that while they celebrated their petty victory, he was already architecting their downfall. Let them think they'd won. Their arrogance would make the eventual reckoning that much sweeter. The January snow had turned to grimy slush outside Porter Gregg Architects when Owen Gregg finally cracked. He'd been watching Blake move through the office like a coiled spring for 2 weeks, maintaining an eerie composure that unnerved everyone who knew about the Christmas party revelation. "I can't take it anymore," Owen burst into Blake's office, closing the door behind him. "I should have told you years ago. I tried to hint at it, but—" "Sit down," Blake commanded without looking up from his computer. His voice carried the same authority it always had, but now with an edge that made Owen sink into the chair immediately. "How long have you known?" Blake asked, finally meeting Owen's eyes. Owen's collar felt too tight. "About the affair? 5 years. About the twins." He swallowed hard. "Almost since the beginning. James would get drunk at gallery openings, brag about how he'd pulled one over on his successful big brother." Blake's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "And you, my business partner of 20 years, decided to keep this information to yourself. You have to understand." Owen leaned forward, desperation in his voice. "Half our social circle knew. Alice has been covering Sabrina's tracks for years, those business trips to check investment properties. She was with James. Hell, even Sabrina's brother Tom helped maintain the lie. He actually said you deserved it for being too focused on your career." Blake's fingers moved across his keyboard, each keystroke deliberate. "Keep talking. James has been planning this for months. He's already telling people he's going to merge his gallery with our commercial division. He thinks you'll be too devastated to fight back." Owen ran a hand through his thinning hair. "He's been approaching our clients, suggesting they could benefit from having their building's aesthetics managed by an in-house art consultant." A small smile played at the corners of Blake's mouth. How convenient of everyone to be so forthcoming now. "Blake, I'm sorry. I know I should have." "Yes," Blake cut him off, "you should have." "That will be all, Owen." "That's it? You're not going to—" "I said that will be all." After Owen left, Blake opened his email. A message from his private investigator contained preliminary findings on James's gallery finances. Another from his offshore accounting team detailed the structure of several shell companies being established. A third from his lawyers confirmed the process of moving his patents for sustainable building designs into protected trusts was underway. Let James play his little power games. The board was already set for a very different match. At home, or rather, at the hotel suite he'd moved into, Blake reviewed years of recorded conversations, security footage, and financial records his team had gathered. The twins' voices rang out from his laptop. "Dad, such a joke." Marcus's voice from 6 months ago, recorded by the home security system Blake had installed himself. "He actually thinks we care about his stupid architecture lectures." "Uncle James says we can intern at the gallery next summer," Mason replied. "Way better than drafting blueprints with him." Blake added the clips to a growing file labeled custody evidence. Not that he wanted custody, but he did want to ensure they couldn't claim anything from him later. Across town, in the converted warehouse that housed Porter Contemporary Gallery, James was riding the high of his imagined victory. He stood in his office, phone pressed to his ear, unaware that every word was being recorded through the spyware Blake's team had planted. "The merger will be announced next quarter," James said smugly to whoever was on the other end. "Blake's been hiding in his hotel since the party. By the time he pulls himself together, I'll have shifted half his clients to our new integrated design division." He laughed. "The best part? He'll have to watch his precious firm become just another part of my empire." The recording uploaded automatically to Blake's secure server, joining hundreds of others documenting James's increasingly bold plans. But James had made a crucial mistake, one that Blake's forensic accountants had already uncovered. For years, James had been embezzling from the investment properties he shared with Blake, using creative accounting to hide the money trails. The funds had financed his lavish lifestyle with Sabrina, exotic vacations disguised as business trips, expensive gifts hidden in gallery expenses, even a secret apartment in the city's arts district. Now those very properties were about to become the noose around James's neck. At their weekly dinner, Sabrina sat across from James in an exclusive restaurant, her confidence as unshaken as her expensive highlights. Blake's lawyer sent over the initial divorce filing, she said, sipping her wine. Standard stuff, he's not even contesting my right to half the assets. Her smile was predatory. He's probably grateful we're letting him save face by calling it an amicable split. James reached across the table to take her hand. Once the merger goes through, you won't have to worry about money ever again. The gallery's expansion plan. Mrs. Porter? They looked up to find a courier holding an envelope. You've been served. The thick stack of papers inside wiped the smile from Sabrina's face. Page after page of documented evidence. Her systematic emotional manipulation of the twins, financial records showing how she'd used Blake's money to fund her affair, sworn statements from hotel staff, restaurant workers, and other witnesses detailing years of indiscretions. This is nothing, she said, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine. He can't prove. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Her investment account had been frozen pending investigation of irregular activities. Another buzzed the same message about their joint accounts. A third, the twins' trust funds were under review. Across the restaurant, a man in a business suit discreetly photographed their reactions. Another piece of evidence for Blake's growing collection. The next morning, James arrived at his gallery to find potential buyers examining his most valuable pieces. His assistant handed him a stack of papers with trembling hands. The joint properties, she explained. They're being sold. What? I never authorize. The paperwork is all in order. Signed by both owners. James scanned the documents, his face darkening as he recognized the shell company names. All roads led back to Blake. He'd structured the sale so that James had no choice but to sell his shares, and Blake, through his network of front companies, was the only viable buyer. The price? Pennies on the dollar. In his temporary office, a sleek space in a building he quietly owned, Blake reviewed the reports from his various teams. The carefully constructed facade of James's success was crumbling. Each revelation exposed another crack in the foundation. His phone buzzed with a text from Alice Malone. Please, we need to talk. I can explain everything. Blake's response was simple. Check your email. Minutes later, Alice's scream echoed through the Porter-Gregg offices as she opened the message containing proof of her complicity in Sabrina's deceptions, along with documentation of several ethical violations that would end her career in corporate management. The dominoes were falling exactly as planned. Tom, Sabrina's brother, was next. His construction company had relied heavily on contracts from Porter-Gregg. Those were now being reviewed for quality concerns. His attempts to reach Blake through mutual friends met with polite but firm closed doors. The twins, sensing the shift in power, tried a different approach. Marcus showed up at Blake's hotel one evening, his familiar arrogance replaced by an attempt at teenage contrition. Dad, he started, then flinched at Blake's cold stare. I mean, Blake. We didn't mean. Your trust fund documents are on the table, Blake interrupted, not looking up from his work. I suggest you read them carefully, particularly the morality clauses. Marcus picked up the papers, his face paling as he read. But this means that your future depends entirely on your behavior? Yes. I designed it that way from the beginning. Blake finally looked at him. Interesting how quickly you drop the real dad narrative when money's involved. The door closed behind Marcus with a definitive click. Through his hotel window, Blake watched the boy hurry through the snow to where Mason waited in their car, the one James had bought them after the Christmas reveal, not knowing it would be the last gift he could afford to give them. That night, Blake sat in his hotel suite reviewing the latest reports. James's gallery was hemorrhaging investors, his reputation in the art world tainted by whispers of financial impropriety. Sabrina's careful investment portfolio was frozen, her attempts to access emergency funds blocked at every turn. The twins were beginning to understand that their trust funds, their future hung by threads Blake controlled. But this was just the beginning. His phone buzzed with an update from his private investigator. They'd found James's secret apartment, complete with records of every rendezvous, every gift purchased with embezzled money, every lie told to cover their tracks. Blake opened his laptop and began composing emails. One to his lawyers, attaching the latest evidence. One to the art world publications that had fawned over James's success, suggesting they might want to look closer at his gallery's finances. One to the board members who would vote on James's proposed merger, sharing some concerning financial projections. In their comfortable suburban home paid for with Blake's money, Sabrina paced while James tried to calm her. "He's just lashing out," James insisted. "Once the initial shock wears off." Initial shock? Sabrina's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "He's systematically destroying everything we built. The accounts are frozen, the lawyers are circling, and you're telling me to wait it out? I have the gallery. The gallery's bleeding money, and you know it. The merger's dead in the water, James. No one will touch us with these allegations hanging over our heads." Outside their window, another car drove by slowly, its occupant photographing the house. They'd given up trying to count how many private investigators Blake had watching them. The twins, grounded after their failed attempt to manipulate Blake, sat in their rooms watching their smartphones become increasingly useless as accounts and privileges disappeared one by one. "He can't do this," Mason insisted, trying another decline card on his favorite gaming platform. "We're his kids legally. We spent the last 15 years telling him he wasn't our real dad," Marcus reminded him bitterly. "Pretty sure that's going to come back to bite us." In his hotel suite, Blake raised a glass to his reflection in the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, unaware of the quiet devastation being orchestrated from this room. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from his various teams, each message another piece of his grand design falling into place. They thought they'd written the ending to this story at the Christmas party. They were about to learn that Blake Porter had merely been setting the stage for his own production, and the final act was going to be spectacular. Let them scramble to salvage what they could. Let them realize, piece by piece, that their entire world had been built on foundations Blake controlled. Let them understand, finally, that they'd never really known him at all. The best revenge, after all, wasn't served cold. It was served with architectural precision, each piece laid exactly where it needed to be for the entire structure to collapse at exactly the right moment. And Blake Porter had always been very, very good at designing things to fall exactly the way he wanted them to. Blake Porter emotionally abused his family for years. Sabrina's voice trembled perfectly on the morning news show. He was controlling, distant, obsessed with his work. James was there for us when Blake wasn't. The TV clicked off in Blake's office. His PR team waited for his response, prepared to launch a counteroffensive against Sabrina and James's desperate smear campaign. "Let them talk," Blake said, reviewing the morning's reports. "Evidence speaks louder than accusations." Within hours, testimonials from long-term employees, clients, and business associates flooded the local media. Stories of Blake's integrity, his mentorship of young architects, his dedication to sustainable community projects. Each character witness had been carefully selected and prepped by his team. "I've known Blake Porter for 15 years, the city's deputy mayor announced at a press conference about the downtown revitalization project. His commitment to this community speaks for itself. These allegations are clearly the bitter accusations of a woman caught in her own infidelity." In their increasingly modest rental home, Sabrina threw the morning paper across the room. "They're making us look like villains." "Calm down," James paced, his designer shoes scuffing the laminate flooring a far cry from their former marble halls. The merger is dead." Sabrina's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Your investors are running scared. The bank's questioning every transaction, and you're still talking about the merger?" James grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. Once your divorce settlement comes through, Mrs. Porter." A courier appeared at their door. Documents from the court. The thick envelope contained evidence that made Sabrina sink to the floor. Years of recorded conversations, surveillance photos, financial records, all documenting how she'd systematically turned the twins against Blake while using his money to fund her affair. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "We were so careful." But Blake had been more careful. Every secret rendezvous, every manipulative conversation with the twins, every misappropriated dollar, all meticulously documented and presented with damning clarity. Meanwhile, at their private school, Marcus and Mason Porter were discovering the real cost of their betrayal. Their friends' parents, many with business connections to Blake, had suddenly decided their children shouldn't associate with those boys who treated their father so badly. "We need to fix this," Mason said, watching another lunch table turn their backs. "Our trust fund." "Already tried." Marcus cut him off. "Went to his hotel last week, remember? He just showed me the morality clauses in the trust documents." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out our real dad can't actually provide for us." Their attempted reconciliation came too late. Blake's office received their carefully rehearsed apology letter and sent back a single USB drive. On it, years of their own voices. "Dad's such a pathetic tryhard. Uncle James says we don't have to pretend to respect him anymore. Can't wait till we never have to see his face again." The twins' trust funds, originally set up to cover their college education and give them a start in life, were legally redirected to a new foundation supporting children of parental alienation. At Porter Contemporary Gallery, James's carefully cultivated world was crumbling. The audit team Blake's lawyers had worked through years of creative bookkeeping, each discovery another nail in the gallery's coffin. Mr. Porter, his assistant, hovered nervously at his office door. "The Rothschild collection, they're pulling their pieces. And the Chun exhibition is canceling." James slumped in his Italian leather chair, one of the few luxury items he had left. His phone buzzed with another notification. Another investor pulling out, another client distancing themselves, another piece of his reputation dissolving. The art world, which had once celebrated him as a visionary dealer, now whispered about fraud, embezzlement, and betrayal. Every connection he'd built, every relationship he'd cultivated, all were poisoned by the truth Blake had systematically exposed. "You promised we'd be taken care of," Sabrina screamed during another of their increasingly frequent fights. She'd liquidated her assets to invest in his gallery expansion, confident in their victory over Blake. Now those dreams were dissolving like smoke. "The divorce court awarded him everything," she continued, waving the final judgment in James's face. "Everything. The houses, the investments, even my own real estate portfolio." The judge's decision had been decisive. Blake's documented evidence of Sabrina's infidelity, financial misconduct, and emotional manipulation left no room for sympathy. 3 years passed. Porter Gregg Architects had doubled in size, but Blake's office remained unchanged, a testament to the stability he'd maintained while others lost everything. The downtown community center, now completed, had won international awards for sustainable design. His new penthouse offered a commanding view of the city, including the building that had once housed Porter Contemporary Gallery. The space was now a trendy restaurant. The owner had gotten an excellent deal after the gallery's bankruptcy auction. "Mr. Porter?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Marcus and Mason Porter are here. They don't have an appointment." Through his office security feed, Blake watched his former sons fidgeting in the lobby. Gone were the designer clothes and arrogant poses. 3 years of community college funded by part-time jobs had changed them. "Security will escort them out," Blake replied. "Let them learn what it felt like to be dismissed, to be treated as unwelcome intruders in someone's life." That evening, as Blake reviewed the final plans for his firm's latest international project, a notification popped up on his screen. James had filed for bankruptcy, his final attempt at rebuilding his art career crushed under the weight of his past deceptions. Sabrina had been seen working as a real estate agent at a small suburban firm, showing modest homes to first-time buyers. Her carefully maintained appearance had grown shabby around the edges, her confident smile replaced by a desperate hunger when she talked about commissions. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Julie Cowan, the structural engineer he'd been seeing for the past year. She appreciated his focus, understood his dedication to precision and integrity. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and honest communication, a foundation worth building on. "Dinner tonight?" Her message read. "Just heard about the International Architecture Exhibition acceptance. Congratulations." Blake smiled as he responded. The exhibition would be held in the same venue where James had once showcased his gallery's most prestigious collections. Life had a way of coming full circle. From his penthouse window, Blake watched the city lights come alive as dusk settled. His empire hadn't just survived, it had thrived, growing stronger from the attempt to destroy it. The community center stood as a beacon of urban renewal, its success a testament to the power of building something lasting. Those who had betrayed him had built their lives on deception, thinking they could steal what he had created. They never understood that true success, like true architecture, required a foundation of integrity. The elevator dinged, and Julie stepped into his penthouse. She carried a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses, her smile genuine and warm. "To new foundations," she said, pouring the champagne. Blake raised his glass, thinking of all the foundations that had crumbled: James's gallery, Sabrina's social status, the twins' trust funds, and the new ones he had built in their place. "To building things that last," he replied. Outside his window, the city sprawled before them, a testament to the power of careful planning and precise execution. Tomorrow, he would continue building his legacy. But tonight, he would celebrate the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well. The news of James's bankruptcy and Sabrina's fall from grace brought no joy. He was long past needing that kind of vindication. His revenge had been executed with the same precision he brought to his architectural designs: methodical, thorough, and ultimately perfect in its completion. Some would call it cruel, the thoroughness with which he dismantled their lives. But Blake knew better. He'd simply revealed the true nature of the foundations they'd built, foundations made of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Their collapse was inevitable. He'd just ensured it happened on his terms. In his study, a single architectural model remained: the community center that had occupied his attention during that last Christmas party. It stood as a reminder that while some things needed to be torn down, others could be built to last for generations. Julie wrapped her arms around him from behind, understanding his moment of reflection. She'd never asked about Sabrina or James or the twins, accepting that they were part of a structure he'd deliberately demolished. "The sunrise from here must be spectacular," she said, looking out over the city. "It is," Blake agreed, "especially when you understand the true value of new beginnings." As night settled over the city, Blake Porter stood in his penthouse, master of all he surveyed. He had rebuilt his life not through loud revenge or dramatic confrontations, but through the same careful planning and precision that had made him successful in the first place. The best revenge, after all, wasn't just living well, it was building something better from the ruins of betrayal. And Blake Porter had always been very, very good at building things that lasted. Epilogue: 20 years later. Blake Porter stood at the window of his corner office in Porter Architectural Group's new headquarters, watching the sunset paint the skyline he'd helped shape over 4 decades. At 65, his hair had turned distinguished silver, but his eyes retained the same sharp focus that had guided him through both triumph and betrayal. The city had changed dramatically since that Christmas party 20 years ago. 5 major developments bearing his firm's signature style dotted the horizon, each a testament to sustainable design and community impact. The downtown community center, the project he'd been working on during that fateful holiday season, had become a blueprint for urban renewal projects worldwide. "Mr. Porter?" His executive assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your daughter's here." Sophie Porter Cowan, his and Julie's 18-year-old daughter, bounded into the office with her mother's energy and his precision of thought. She carried rolled-up sketches for her first-year architecture project at MIT. "Dad, I think I finally solved that structural issue we discussed." She spread the drawings across his desk, her enthusiasm infectious. Julie appeared in the doorway, watching them with a warm smile. 20 years of marriage had only strengthened their partnership, built on the bedrock of mutual respect and shared values. She'd risen to become one of the country's leading structural engineers, her innovations complementing Blake's designs perfectly. "Ready for dinner?" Julie asked. "The reservation's at 7. Blake gathered his things, including the latest industry award his firm had received, Architectural Firm of the Decade. As they headed to the elevator, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished doors. Time had been kind to him, success agreeing with his features in a way that bitterness never had. The same couldn't be said for others. That morning's local paper had carried a small item about James Porter's death in a modest nursing home. His final years had been a steady descent into obscurity and poverty. The once celebrated gallery owner had never recovered from his bankruptcy, reduced to working as a part-time art teacher at a community center, ironically, one that Blake's firm had designed. Sabrina's fall had been equally dramatic. After years of struggling as a small-time real estate agent, she'd attempted to rebuild her social status by marrying a wealthy developer. But her new husband's fortune had been lost in the market crash of 2030, leaving her exactly where she'd started, alone and dependent on others for survival. Recent reports placed her living in a small apartment in the suburbs, surviving on Social Security and bitter memories. The twins' story had taken different paths. Marcus, after years of dead-end jobs and failed get-rich-quick schemes, had finally found modest success running a small photography studio. He specialized in wedding photography, a far cry from the artistic career James had promised him. He'd attempted to reconnect with Blake several times over the years. Each overture met with the same polite but firm rejection. Mason had fared slightly better, earning a business degree from a state college and securing a middle management position at a regional bank. He'd married young, divorced quickly, and now lived in a neighboring city. Occasionally, he drove past the Porter Architectural Group building, looking up at the windows and wondering about the life he could have had. Neither twin had received a penny from their original trust funds, which had grown into the Porter Foundation for Family Reconciliation, an organization that had helped thousands of families affected by parental alienation. The foundation's headquarters occupied the building that had once housed Porter Contemporary Gallery, irony not lost on anyone who knew the story. Owen Gregg had retired 5 years ago, selling his shares in the firm to Blake for a fair price, more than he deserved, perhaps, but Blake believed in acknowledging loyalty, even if it came late. Owen's eventual confession and assistance in documenting the extent of the betrayal had earned him a measure of redemption. Alice Malone had disappeared from the corporate world after Blake's evidence of her complicity became public. Last anyone heard, she was working as an administrative assistant in a small town 3 states away. Tom, Sabrina's brother, had lost his construction company after Porter Architectural Group pulled their contracts. He tried to sue for discrimination but withdrew the case when Blake's lawyers presented evidence of his role in covering up the affair. He now worked as a site supervisor for a competitor, his dreams of running his own company as dead as his sister's social aspirations. At the restaurant, one of the city's finest, occupying the top floor of a building Blake had designed, Sophie chattered excitedly about her studies. She'd inherited Blake's passion for architecture and Julie's innovative spirit, already showing promise as the future of Porter Architectural Group. "I've been thinking about the family history project," Sophie said, referencing a school assignment. "Most of my friends are interviewing their grandparents, but I want to write about how you built the firm, Dad. The sustainable design innovations, the community impact." Blake shared a look with Julie. They'd always been honest with Sophie about his first marriage and the betrayal, teaching her that integrity was the only foundation worth building on. Speaking of history, Julie added, "The Porter Foundation is opening its 10th international office next month. The work they're doing with families. It's remarkable how something positive came from such pain." Blake nodded, remembering the day he'd redirected the twins' trust funds. That single decision had spawned an organization that helped parents and children rebuild relationships destroyed by alienation and manipulation. It was perhaps his most satisfying achievement, turning personal betrayal into global healing. "Did you see the news about James?" Sophie asked carefully. She knew the broad strokes of the story, though not all the details. "Yes," Blake replied simply. He felt no joy at his brother's passing, no satisfaction in his final years of poverty. The revenge had never been about making them suffer, it had been about revealing the true nature of their characters and letting them live with the consequences. After dinner, they drove to their home, a stunning modern mansion Blake had designed himself, its walls of glass offering panoramic views of the city he'd helped build. In his private study, a wall of awards and recognitions testified to decades of innovation in sustainable architecture. But it was the family photos that drew the eye. Sophie's graduations, family vacations, moments of genuine joy captured in time. The next morning, Blake received an email from Marcus. Another attempt at reconciliation, this time prompted by James's death. The message spoke of regret, of lost opportunities, of the desire to make amends. Blake's response was the same as always. a polite acknowledgement and a donation in Marcus's name to the Porter Foundation. Some bridges, once burned, weren't meant to be rebuilt. In his office, Blake reviewed the plans for his latest project, a revolutionary, eco-friendly development that would redefine urban living. At 65, he could have retired, could have stepped back and let others take the reins. But he still had buildings to design, innovations to perfect, a legacy to build. Julie joined him for lunch, bringing updates about their newest joint venture, a series of sustainable housing projects in developing countries. Their partnership, both personal and professional, had created more than they could have achieved individually. "Any regrets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Blake looked out at the city skyline, at the buildings that bore his signature style, at the communities that had been transformed by his vision. He thought of Sophie, brilliant and determined, ready to carry that vision into the future. He thought of the Porter Foundation, turning personal pain into global change. "No," he said simply. "No regrets." Somewhere in the suburbs, Sabrina watched a young couple reject another modest home she was trying to sell. Her carefully maintained appearance couldn't hide the bitterness that had carved itself into her features. She drove home to her small apartment, passing the community center that still bore Blake's name. In another part of the city, Marcus packed up his photography equipment after another wedding shoot, his dreams of artistic greatness long since replaced by the reality of paying bills. He avoided art galleries. They reminded him too much of James's empty promises and his own squandered opportunities. Mason sat in his bank office, a middle manager's desk in a middle manager's room, looking at photos of the Porter Architectural Group's latest triumph in the business news. His own son would soon be college age, but there would be no trust fund to draw from, no legacy to inherit. But in his office high above the city, Blake Porter continued to build. Not for revenge that had been achieved long ago, but for the future. For Sophie, for the communities his buildings served, for the families the Porter Foundation helped heal. He had learned, over these 20 years, that the truest victory wasn't in watching others fall. It was in continuing to rise, in building something so magnificent that those who had tried to destroy you became nothing more than footnotes in your success story. At day's end, Blake left his office, passing the wall of photographs documenting his firm's journey. The downtown community center, his first triumph after the betrayal, the international awards, the Porter Foundation offices, Sophie's first design project, each image a brick in the foundation of a legacy built on integrity, innovation, and the quiet strength of a man who refused to be broken. The sun set behind the city skyline, painting the buildings in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere out there, the remnants of his past lived their small lives, haunted by what they'd lost. But Blake Porter looked only forward, toward the next project, the next innovation, the next chapter in a story that had turned betrayal into triumph. After all, the best revenge wasn't just success, it was success so complete that those who had wronged you became irrelevant to your story. And Blake Porter's story was far from over.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.